to this week's episode of Designed and Delivered for Destiny. I'm your host, Nicole Cherie. I'm a wife, author, life coach, business owner, and speaker. I was a mental health therapist for over 10 years, but now I want to bring the conversations from my office and bring it to you wherever you are. Each episode, we will discuss various topics related to your design, your deliverance, or your destiny. I'm glad that you are taking time out of your busy schedule to tune in. So let's go ahead and jump on in. Now, as we continue the series on family, the next topic I would love for us to discuss is the nuances of communication with people in our family. And this topic it's one of those that can often reveal the essence of what creates these unbreakable bonds within our families, or it's the unveiling of the thing that's been destroying familial relationships and just causing people to just simply tolerate each other. It's not, an easy topic to discuss because whenever we use the word family, automatically our sensitivities, are heightened, our defenses are up, and we grapple with how to not allow ourselves to be triggered by the conversation. Why? Because in our minds, we never really say it, but we feel that there is this unspoken vow that we've taken that says we have to protect our family at all costs. Which, maybe that's not a bad thing, but what happens if that means never addressing the very things that is silently destroying the family from within? Unhealthy communication patterns, they are a silent killer within so many families all over the world, more so than abuse, infidelity, or even abandonment. If you think about it, every family will face challenges, but how is it that some families can heal quickly and move on, and others are weighed down by the burdens of this life? Why are some people thriving in their relationships and their life goals, whereas others, they just seem to keep facing limitations and defeat? Well, surprisingly, oftentimes it boils down to communication, which is generally rooted in how the person's family of origin communicated. So the way I think of communication is like it's a door for life, for love, for healing, understanding, for vision to enter into a person's life. It creates a portal for there to be a transition in perspective that takes one from a place of darkness to light, from brokenness to being whole. It's a vehicle for setting healthy boundaries, for speaking the truth in love, for providing support, encouragement, accountability. I'll even add this one, that it's a catalyst for change. So if there are so many great benefits to communication, especially within the family, why then are so many families struggling to maintain healthy communication patterns? Now, the answer to this, it's going to vary depending on who you ask. But overall, I believe it's because most families were never taught how to use communication as a tool to navigate the hardships of life. Most people just don't know what to say when someone tells them that something tragic has happened in their lives. The default is to say, "I'm sorry." Many people have not been taught how to express the hurt that they've been carrying without needing that adrenaline of anger to help them release what's been on their mind for some time. And if we go even deeper, we can recognize that families weren't taught healthy communication skills for so many reasons. Some people had to focus on surviving, and therefore communication was just simply a means to survive. Dealing with thoughts and feelings seemed pointless, and this kind of unwanted burden or interruption to the culture of survival. Many families were even deceived by religion into thinking that having negative emotions was a sin and that you should just forgive and get over it and move on quickly. That it's dishonoring to express yourself to a parent or an elder. In some cultures, there's this stigma of shame placed on a person or a family if one were to openly express themselves or confront a person, especially someone older. There's this fear of retaliation that kept you from communicating. There's so many reasons why families have been put in a position to fail in this area. What would you say was the underlying reason for unhealthy communication patterns in your family? And you need to answer this, right? Because how you were molded to communicate was not your responsibility, but how you choose to communicate today is. So let's keep unpacking. Would you agree that the way we approach our familial relationships is unlike any other relationship in our life? When you're raised within a family unit, you're generally conditioned to have two sets of rules. One for your family and one for everyone else. Why? Well, because family is supposed to be part of your life forever. And the goal is to ensure that there is this unified culture that brings the, longevity, that creates standards for what is normal and acceptable behavior. This culture includes an understanding of how to communicate with your parents, your siblings, your elders, your peers, your extended families, what you can and cannot say. There were these unspoken rules around how to deal with conflict, whether you can express your thoughts and feelings openly or you're expected to just keep them to yourself and just deal. And it's important that we recognize that, the rules may even be slightly different for different members of the family, or at least there can be a perception that the rules are different, meaning oftentimes the oldest is expected to follow the rules and take on more responsibility, which means they become carriers of the load for the siblings oftentimes, and sometimes even the parents. Now, not every oldest child will take on this responsibility, but generally speaking, it is true. Many of the older siblings have a hard time expressing themselves because often they aren't given that privilege. On the other hand, the middle child and the younger child, they have their own unique set of rules. For instance, the youngest often feels liberated to be expressive because they're given more freedom as the parents have learned to relax and just let children be children. Now, again, this is just generalization that isn't true for every family and all siblings, and I've seen where this has actually been reversed. But the point is that I want you to think about what was the case for your family and your siblings. Was it functional or dysfunctional? Because often the culture of communication that you were raised in, it may have appeared to be functional, but it was actually unhealthy. And when I say functional, I mean that everyone accepted things for what they were and they would just play their part, which created this false sense of stability within the family. But the bottom line is that everyone born into the family is expected to adopt the culture or risk being ostracized, talked about, or even abandoned, making this a very dysfunctional family dynamic. Now let's just take a second and maybe we can just look at some of the differences between healthy and unhealthy communication patterns, within a family, just to give you a better idea of what was it that you experienced. Now, before I go further, and I say this all the time, I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but we need to discuss these things, not for you to go down a path of blaming, but for there to be understanding that leads to transformation and healing. Light comes to expose darkness and then expel it, not for you to become bitter and resentful that the darkness is there. Every family has dark spots until they are uprooted. So be sure to keep that in mind as you both have internal conversations within yourself about these things and as you talk with your relatives, okay? So, unhealthy communication in a family typically consists of patterns such as people are just not able to discuss conflicts without there being yelling or anger or passive aggressive behaviors. When people do actually express how they feel, the other person may immediately become defensive. They may even withdraw from that person out of anger or until that person gives in to what they want. People tend to show emotions on their faces more often than using their words, so facial expressions becomes a means of manipulation and control. Children generally don't know how to or they're fearful of expressing themselves. So when they become quiet after something bad happens, parents are relieved and they think, oh, they're handling this well, not realizing that that child has already learned how to suppress their feelings because they know that they can't talk about those things openly. Often you'll see again with children that they'll act out physically when they're upset because they never develop the skill of regulating their emotions and communicating what they're feeling. In homes where you have these unhealthy patterns, often parents are likely to complain a lot to their children instead of addressing their issues directly with their spouse or other adults or even a therapist. Gossip throughout the family is common as people look for outlets to vent their frustration. Children may even engage in, let's say, bullying behaviors because they've become so hardened from having to suppress their own feelings that subconsciously they resent children who display and express their sensitivities. You'll even see where you'll have people who are just constantly expressing themselves through complaining. You may find situations where grandparents are just, telling parents to endure whatever they're going through, or worse, to say nothing at all. Now, let me say that everything has to be assessed through context, right? Because there are times when it is safer to just not say anything. But with that being said, if you're in a home where there's physical or verbal abuse when people express themselves, that's another indication of unhealthy communication patterns within a family. So these are just a few examples and some of, I would say, the more common experiences that many people can relate to. However, based on your culture and your generation, it may have looked slightly different. So just use these kind of as a reference point, but begin to think about, did I grow up in an environment where there were unhealthy communication patterns? So if you were a recipient of this type of environment in your family, you may currently have some tendencies, right? So let's talk about what those tendencies might be. You may have the tendency to, let's say, avoid conflict. You may experience high levels of anxiety whenever there's any type of disagreement, misunderstanding, or just conflict in general around you. If you were constantly blamed or you just never got a chance to express your side of things, you may be a very defensive person, or you've become a blamer yourself to always ensure that fault is never placed on you. So you may even have a hard time speaking up for what you want and what you believe because you think that everyone is going to judge you, meaning that you have a perception that you are constantly being judged, or that you might be ostracized for speaking up, or maybe even rejected if you share your thoughts and feelings, especially if they're different from other people. You may actually have begun to resent other people who are outspoken because you never had that privilege. One of the more common signs as you assess yourself today is the behavior pattern of suppressing your thoughts and feelings and allowing them to build up within you until it becomes too much and you explode. This is something that can be very dangerous for so many reasons. On the other hand, if communication around you growing up was, let's say, mostly negative, then you may be a complainer and mostly focus on the negative things when you're speaking to people. Now, let me just throw in a disclaimer, right? Not all unhealthy communication patterns are the result of family. Some people, based on their personality and their temperament, are just more inclined to respond to situations in unhealthy ways, despite their family's attempt to help them process things differently. But generally speaking, when you put that person in a healthy environment for a long period of time, they will be influenced by the culture within that family, unless there are just these maybe uncontrollable psychological, mental health type barriers. So, okay, now we talked about unhealthy patterns, right? Let's look at the opposite. healthy communication patterns. What does that look like? So if you grew up in a family where there were healthy communication patterns, then most likely you would have seen situations where people within your family can openly communicate their thoughts and feelings, regardless of their age. There's often intention around asking people how they're feeling, how they were affected by that tough situation. There is intention around ensuring that negative emotions do not impact that person emotionally or psychologically, so people are very receptive to counseling. Some families will even have like a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly family meeting just to check in and give people room to be able to share, or even it might look like doing dinner every day at the dinner table to just converse and connect, to make sure everyone feels heard and can contribute to the family dynamic. Healthy communication patterns often will consist of people choosing to forgive and demonstrate humility. There's this belief system that everyone deserves to be heard. Families then won't try to minimize the other person's feelings, but instead they want them to feel validated while being able to also be open to receiving alternative perspectives and views on a situation. You can see it with the children and how they openly share their feelings, and when they're hurt, they'll tell their parents, or they'll call their parents out if they do something that they weren't supposed to do. And what you'll see is the parents don't respond by chastising them, but instead they reply with understanding, even an apology, and they follow it up with this willingness to make it right or clarify whatever they missed. You'll rarely see in these types of families parents complaining to their children about their marital problems, but instead they work it out amongst themselves or with a counselor. Parents are generally mindful of what is being discussed around their children in order to prevent them from internalizing adult issues at their young age. And here's another big indicator that you were raised in a family with healthy communication patterns. If something was ever done to a child by, let's say, someone in the extended family, steps are immediately taken to address that issue, to move towards reconciliation and healing, whichever one is needed. There isn't this attempt to cover it up and just make it go away. Now, I could just go on and on, of course, and continue to talk about what healthy communication patterns would look like and the culture within a family of healthy communication. But I think you get the point. It's pretty much the opposite of what would happen in a family with negative and dysfunctional communication patterns. So now, if you are a recipient of healthy communication patterns in your family, you likely are very open and forthcoming with your thoughts and feelings. You don't, feel the need to force your opinions on anyone. You're okay with people disagreeing with you. You likely have compassion for those who are struggling to express themselves, and, maybe even get annoyed when people dismiss other people's feelings. You're likely assertive and just kind of willing to speak up in a crowd or small group. You may even get anxious when people demonstrate unhealthy responses to anger, only because it's not something that you've been exposed to. On the other hand, it's also possible that you lack compassion for others because you don't know what it's like to not be heard or to be misunderstood. And, you might have a hard time relating to those who appear to be more, let's say, reserved or timid. You may even be so outspoken that you don't realize that you're taking up all the time in the conversation, or you might be unaware that you just come across as intimidating. That confidence that you receive from just having your voice and discovering your voice at a very young age, it can easily turn into arrogance if your family did not emphasize humility. So healthy patterns don't always lead to healthy outcomes. There are so many factors that are involved. Now, generally speaking, all of our families have been somewhat of a mixture of both. So what you'll need to do then is to take some time to assess and analyze, what pieces of the good have I internalized and what aspects of the negative have I internalized? What tendencies do I have that tend to be fruitful in my life for good reasons versus what has not been working? And what I mean by being fruitful for good reasons is that manipulation can lead to you getting results, but that's not good fruit, right? So you'll need to be able to assess like what has led to good fruit in your life and relationships. And for many of you, it's very possible that even though your family did not have the skills to communicate in healthy ways, you were able to apply spiritual principles to help you navigate, different conflicts without brushing things under the rug. You didn't necessarily minimize things or over spiritualize it, but the principles that you received through your beliefs, it actually did help you when it came down to communication. So if you had to say which type of communication pattern prevailed in your family, which would you say? Share in the comments. All right, so now the question becomes, how do you transition from unhealthy ways of communicating to a healthier way? Well, it first starts with awareness and the acknowledgement that you actually have unhealthy communication patterns. You then want to pray and ask God to reveal to you the areas where you need to shift your approach to communication. And you can also ask those who are close to you and just, don't be defensive, but express appreciation for their feedback and their honesty. Then you want to decide to address and improve those things. The decision is probably the most important part. How often do we have information? How often do we know the areas we need to grow, but we never make the decision to move forward in making those changes? So you have to decide. Now, after that decision, after you have accepted that you are going to benefit from making these changes, that your relationships will improve, and you want to move forward with the process, you'll then need to move towards the answers on how to address those specific areas that have been revealed to you. Things such as how to navigate your triggers, how to shift your expectations of how you believe things should go, how to express your feelings from an I perspective and not constantly blame other people when you're communicating and expressing yourself. You may need to talk to a counselor who is skilled in this area. There are many great books on communication. You can also do an assessment of what did you do in the past that did not work and practice doing the opposite. And the key here is repetition. You did not develop the habits that you have around communication overnight. It was programmed into you. It takes time to change the program. It's not like the television. You just click the button and you're watching something else. It takes repetition. You're going to have to be patient with yourself through this process because it's something that you're going to do well one day. You're going to fail the next. You're going to do well. It takes time. But either way, you will need to be willing to change, to challenge yourself, and to be determined to do things differently. To be honest, at this point in your life, you are the only person who is responsible for your communication style. No one can make you respond a certain way. Unless there's something I don't know where we are now able to jump into other people's bodies and make them do things, no one is able to make you respond a certain way. You are the only one that can change it, and it's never too late. How amazing is it to know that no matter what your age is, God is not done with you yet, and you are still growing. You are still being perfected in Him. And listen, if you are a parent, I admonish you to work on yourself first, then begin to implement these things with your children. It can be very confusing if you're telling them one thing, but then doing the opposite. And no worries, it's not too late for them to change or for them to learn healthy communication patterns. It may take some longer than others. You might not see the shift right away, right? But the key is just do your best to be consistent, and you will see them begin to shift as well. Change, again, it requires so much patience and mercy. Show it to yourself and others as you go on this journey. Now, this one last piece is very important. As you change, never run away from an opportunity to apologize to those you've hurt for communicating in unhealthy ways, even if you were right. Okay? Because part of healthy communication is accountability. And to verbalize that, I didn't handle that in the right way is so powerful and necessary for reconciliation and healing in relationships, okay? Don't assume that people know that you're sorry. Just a simple, hey, I realized that the way that I handled that was not the right way to go about it. So I just wanted to apologize. However you want to say it, it's very important that if you recognize that there were conversations that you had that were not handled correctly, that you take ownership and you apologize. Now, I haven't really spent time discussing the consequences of not making these changes because 9 times out of 10, you've already witnessed them in your life. But for those who aren't quite sure what they are, let me just share a few, okay? If you allow unhealthy communication patterns to continue in your family, you will have people who are carrying around anger, bitterness, resentment, and fear, which then leads to physical health issues, mental health issues, and strained relationships. People will not trust each other. They won't feel safe with each other, and that reality for them, it will transfer to their other relationships. Remember that what we learned from our family becomes the framework, the expectation that we then have for the other people, the other relationships in our lives, which then generally means that we tend to make other people have to compensate for what was done or was not done within our family, and that is not fair to them. When these things are not addressed, people develop insecure attachment styles. Some people have hard time, committing to things, and insecurity and low self-esteem is higher. There's lower performance in the workplace. There's decreased likelihood of goal achievement. I mean, the list goes on, right? These are just a few of the consequences, not to mention all the negative impacts on the well-being of children. Now, because of time, I think we're going to have to do a part 2 because I can hear the questions that you may be thinking, like, what happens when you try to communicate in healthy ways, but no one else in the family is trying? Or what if I communicate and the person doesn't change or even acknowledge their fault? And great question. Another question may be, at what point should I put up boundaries in place? Because I've been expressing my feelings for some time, but I'm just not seeing anything different. So you may have some other questions, and if so, drop them in the comments. And if there are several people who want to continue this conversation or who has questions on any of the platforms, then I will definitely do part 2 next week. Remember, we talk about it to heal and grow from it. Are you communicating in healthy ways? Both your verbal and nonverbal communication is very powerful and can contribute to a person's wholeness or their brokenness. It's your time for healing, deliverance, and all the good and perfect things that God has for you. No longer will healthy communication be a barrier for the enemy to use against you.
It's chain breaking time.
Alrighty, you know what time it is. This is the time where we get to discuss a phrase, pattern, or belief that has been a hindrance to many in the culture. And if we eradicate it, it would improve your life, your family, and the community. The behavior pattern we are addressing this week is the prevalence of false peace in our relationships. The truth is that you are carrying hurt, frustration, or you're bothered by something that that person did or didn't do, but you've chosen to suppress it for the sake of being at peace with all men. The problem is what you carry, you are incubating, which is then what you will produce and pass on to the next person. So you think you're a vessel of peace, but you really become a vessel of bitterness and resentment that is visible to those with a discerning eye. Anger has a look, joy has a look, peace has a look. They always surface no matter how skillful you are at hiding your true feelings. We've all been incubators of anger at some point, but now let's all have the real peace that God desires for us to have by communicating in healthy ways, forgiving those who hurt us, and releasing the hurt instead of carrying it. You deserve the peace, and so do the people in your life. Now let me close with a final word of encouragement. Your words are so powerful, making you a very powerful person. God made you in His image and likeness. He knew that as He spoke and things manifested, the same would be true for you. He desires that you produce those things that are good, that are life-giving, that are fruitful, and He's giving you everything that you need to do so in your mouth. He knows that you have the power to change lives, circumstances, and families for the better. I hope you know that truth as well and will walk in the confidence that your voice matters. You are a vessel of love and transformation. You got this. Until next time, shalom.